The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and by
The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is in the O'Galley section of Melbourne, Florida. Preserved as it was in the early 20th century, historic tours of the Rossiter House include antiques, artifacts, and family heirlooms, and the 1865 Houston Family Cemetery. The last resident of the home was successful businesswoman and philanthropist Caroline P. Rossiter. The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is available for weddings and other special events.
the Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Council of Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida. Florida's unique natural environment includes freshwater springs, pine and palmetto forests, and the one and only Everglades. Wildlife inhabiting these areas include manatee, black bears, panthers, and of course, alligators. Welcome to Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben Brotmarkle. For 5 centuries, people have been writing about Florida's exotic creatures and natural wonders, sparking the imaginations of potential visitors. Not long after the Civil War ended, enterprising individuals began creating tourist attractions that allowed visitors to experience Florida nature in controlled settings. The first of these natural attractions was Silver Springs in Ocala.
Nowadays, you can get in your car, go down the highway, pull right up into the parking lot, but back then there were really no roads. People will have to take a pretty long voyage by steamship, and they would come all the way up the Ocklawaha River until they would get up to Silver Springs. And the people that visited here back then, such as Harriet Beecher Stowe was here in 1878, Sidney Lanier was here in 1876, and we have their accounts of visiting Silver Springs, and they wrote glowingly of the water quality, all of the different colors, all of the wildlife that was there.
A party of us got into a little skiff and floated over the transparent depth. Every variety of water plant was growing and waving over the varied surfaces of the bottom, which had its heights and depths, its caverns and grottos. We could see the fish darting hither and thither and mark on the brilliant sands at the bottom various objects which had been thrown in by experimenting travelers. The water was of about the same high temperature with the spring at Green Cave. The shores were clothed with tropical forests all around, and here and there we could see starry flocks of a peculiar and beautiful white lily, which grows abundantly on these waters. From a star-shaped calyx of 6 narrow white leaves comes out a silver cup. From the edges of this cup rise 6 stamens with their golden heads. By about 10 o'clock, we had left the Silver Spring with its crystal waters behind. Our romance was over, and our faces set homeward. Yet, that evening, as we sat on deck going through the narrows of the Ocklawaha, we felt that the spell of illusion was not quite broken.
Along the way, there were all these different stops that these boats would make. They would deliver and pick up mail as well as exchange goods with local hunters, trappers, fishermen. And the boats that would come down here were pretty narrow, and they would have to actually put long poles to, push their way off the banks and cut trees if they had to. It was kind of difficult getting in here. But over time, they got railroad access into Silver Springs. And then, when the car was invented, they had roads, and now people can just drive right up to it.
From the 1870s to the present, Silver Springs is perhaps best known for the glass-bottom boats that allow visitors to see under the clear water and view the flora and fauna around it.
As far as we can tell, the glass-bottom boats were invented here. They're found in attractions now in many parts of the world, including other Florida state parks and other Florida old roadside attractions. but from as far as we can tell, they were invented here, and it was a couple of enterprising teenagers that lived here locally that decided to put some panes of glass on their rowboats, and they started charging people for it. And it just grew from there. You know, they started out just real simple, taking people on a ride on their rowboat that they put a pane of glass on, until eventually, you know, you had motorized glass-bottom boats that could fit many more people. The boats that are in operation today are the exact same boats from the 1960s. And when this became a state park, they all got brand new electric motors, but these are the same exact boats from the early 1960s.
In the past, it was not uncommon for visitors to Silver Springs to hear a little mythology mixed in with facts about Florida history. For example, the glass-bottom boat captains would entertain tourists by telling them that a submerged 18th century rowboat belonged to 16th century Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto.
There are a bunch of limestone rocks down there that they used to tell people were dinosaur bones, to give you an example. And we know that dinosaurs were never in Florida, and they were just rocks. But they would tell people on the tour that they were looking at dinosaur bones. And so some of the captains now will tell people, we used to tell people that these were dinosaur bones.
Today, visitors to Silver Springs can get accurate information about Florida history in the Silver River Museum and Environmental Education Center.
The Silver River Museum and Environmental Education Center is actually run by the Marion County Public Schools, and it's a unique and very worthwhile partnership with Florida State Parks. They started in about 1991, long before things like the campground, the ranger station, the cabins were built at what used to be known as Silver River State Park. And right now they take 4th and 5th graders. Pretty much every 4th and 5th grade class in this county goes there for a field trip. 4th grade learns about Florida history because they have a pioneer village there known as the Cracker Village. They have replica as well as original structures showing different time periods of pioneer days in Florida.
Inside the museum are exhibits covering different periods of Florida history from European contact to the present, as well as displays exploring the area's prehistory.
They have a number of artifacts and fossils that have been found in the Silver River, the Ocklawaha River, or in the surrounding area going back many, many years, you know, with human habitation here, which there's a very long history of, as well as the Pleistocene megafauna like the mammoth and mastodon. They have a completely articulated skeleton of a mammoth in the museum, so when you go in there, that's one of the more impressive things that you see.
In 1985, the state of Florida bought Silver Springs and created the 5,000-acre Silver River State Park. The Silver Springs attraction was operated by a private company until 2013, when the state took over and renamed the facility Silver Springs State Park. While the famous glass-bottom boats are still in operation, some elements from the old days are no longer around.
They just did things a little bit differently than we do now. For example, Ross Allen Reptile Institute, who was here since the 1930s, he started the Reptile Institute in 1931. They did things like they would buy snakes from anybody that would bring them live snakes, and they would milk, you know, diamondback rattlesnakes. They would go to expeditions in South America, bring an anaconda, release it in the spring, and then wrestle it. You know, as a state park, those are not really the kinds of things that we do. They were very popular. A huge part of the success of this place, you know, there were so many amazing, entertaining things that they did, as well as educating the public. But as a Florida State Park, we're trying to preserve, interpret, and restore our natural and cultural resources out here. And so rounding up alligators and snakes to wrestle them isn't really part of what we do, but it is an important part of this place's past.
In 1924, Walter Carl Ray Sr. and William Shorty Davidson took Silver Springs from a small tourist attraction to new heights of success that continued into the 1960s.
There were less than 1,000 people visiting a month in 1924, and by 1950, they had 500,000 visitors. And by 1962, 1 million people were visiting Silver Spring State Park, and that was by far the most visited attraction in Florida at the time. And 1 million might not sound like a lot in today's terms, we have over 100 million people visiting Florida right now, about a year. But back then there were far fewer people visiting Florida. So 1 million to visit Silver Springs in a year was quite an achievement. And that era from 1924 to 1962, we refer to as the Ray and Davidson years. And that's kind of when the Silver Springs attraction was at its peak.
Silver Springs is one of the world's largest artesian springs, and today the state park provides more access to the water than ever before.
What we're trying to do here as a state park is trying to return it to that era, return the focus to be on the water and the glass-bottom boats. When this became a state park, you could launch a canoe or kayak for the first time. And so we're trying to get people out on the water as much as possible to see the water bubbling out of the springs here, which I believe we have 3 first magnitude springs. Right here at Silver Springs, there's actually about 30 spring vents in the first mile or so of the river. And the river goes for about 5 miles before it meets the Ocklawaha and on down to the St. John's and into Jacksonville.
Visitors to Silver Springs can catch a glimpse of wild macaques in the park. Some people believe that the monkeys were brought here in 1938 for the filming of Tarzan Finds a Son. There were plenty of chimpanzees in the movie, but not macaques.
The monkeys, as far as we know, were brought here in the 1930s by a gentleman named Colonel Toohey. He ran a tour boat operation called the Jungle Cruise. From what we understand, he got some rhesus macaques and released them on one of the islands on the river, and he didn't realize that they could swim. He was told that they couldn't swim. He thought that he could just put them on this island and they would be there, but they swam off the island, and we believe the macaques that are here today are descended from those.
The producers of Tarzan Finds a Son were not the only filmmakers to utilize the clear water and picturesque setting of Silver Springs. Other films shot on location here include the 1965 James Bond movie Thunderball, the 1951 film The Barefoot Mailman, and many others. Before coming to Silver Springs, filmmaker and underwater actor Rico Browning worked as a professional swimmer at Weeki Wachee Springs, another tourist attraction that utilizes Florida nature. While Silver Springs is known for its glass-bottom boats, Weeki Wachee is famous for its mermaid shows.
We put on an underwater night show at Weeki Wachee, and it was very successful. However, there was only one motel at Weeki Wachee at that time, and you had to travel 18 miles into Brooksville to get to the next motel. So I got the bright idea, why not go to Silver Springs, because they got motels everywhere, and tourists, and do an underwater show there at night. So I came up and talked to Bill Ray, who was the son of Ray Davidson and Ray, and his brother Buck Ray, who was the general manager. And I talked to them about doing a night show at Silver Springs and building an underwater theater. And they turned me down. But just as I was leaving, Bill Ray, he said, Rico, look, why don't you let me give you a job here, and over a period of time, we'll talk them into doing it. I said, well, fine. So he made me the Assistant Director of Public Relations at Silver Springs. And I was in that job for about 5 years.
While working at Silver Springs, Browning met director Jack Arnold. That led to Browning performing in all 3 Creature from the Black Lagoon movies in the 1950s, wearing the iconic Gillman costume in the underwater scenes.
Well, at first, I put it this way, when you're a kid and you play football, you put on a uniform, shoulder pads and everything, and it's pretty clumsy. But when you get in a game, you forget you even have it on. So it's about the same with the suit. It was a little awkward, but once I got into the water and started using it, I forgot I have it on.
After his 3-movie stint as the Creature from the Black Lagoon, Browning became the stuntman and underwater director for the popular TV series Sea Hunt, shooting at Silver Springs.
We did a 3rd year of Sea Hunt at Silver Springs and shot all the episodes for that year. And I was hired to just be the bad guy. And I would fight Courtney Brown, who was the double for Lloyd Bridges in just about every scene. And I had to wear different bathing suits, different hair makeup, and either go as a blonde or a brunette or wear a hood. And I enjoyed it very much. And we then moved to Nassau and shot the remaining couple of years of Sea Hunt over there.
Browning was also co-creator of the film and television series Flipper, working with a trained dolphin named Mitzi. Dolphin shows were a highlight at Marineland of Florida, where portions of the Creature from the Black Lagoon films were shot. Located between St. Augustine and Daytona Beach, Marineland opened in 1938, attracting as many as 900,000 visitors annually. Marineland had literary connections that added to its popularity. The grandson of Leo Tolstoy, author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, was one of the park's founders. Beloved Florida writer Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings was married to Norton Baskin, who managed the Dolphin Restaurant and Moby Dick Lounge at Marineland. Renowned authors Ernest Hemingway and John Dos Passos also visited the bar at the park. Marineland attracted both tourists and residents.
1938 it opened. I was born in 40, and it closed during the war. And when it opened up in 46 or 47 after the war, I visited there as a child. And I lived with my aunt and uncle, and they told me they were going to take me to Marineland, and I thought it was like, you know, the Marines in the service. But I really enjoyed it. It had 2 tanks. Well, it was developed for a film studio. But then people would come and look because they had the creatures of the deep in their pretty natural habitat. And you can observe them through little portholes in the side of the tanks. And so the tourists started coming. And then when they developed A1A, fully and had bridges and all, it was a big draw.
It was very exciting for me to see the life in the water through the portholes. I went every chance I got.
In his 1791 book Bartram's Travels, naturalist William Bartram describes struggling with aggressive alligators in the wilds of Florida. Bartram's observations of the natural Florida still fascinate readers, but some believe that his stories of alligator encounters may be exaggerated. Here at Jungle Adventures in East Central Florida, you can get up close and personal with an alligator without fearing for your life.
The experience is like going out into the woods in Florida, into the swamp, without having to worry about getting lost. I mean, that's a big thing that happens a lot. People get out into the Everglades and stuff like that, and they can get lost quicker than they know. Here, at least you got some sidewalks to walk on. You don't have to get your feet wet unless you want to. You can get to see, hear, and smell the real old Florida, the way it used to be back in the day. Not much has changed here. And that's what they can expect. They can also expect a tour with a guide that will get them to a wildlife encounter where they get to go hands-on with native animals of Florida and some invasive species. They also get to go to a Native American village where we like to talk about the original heritage of Florida, the Native Americans. We have an alligator feeding where we hand feed large alligators either by jumping or actually walking out there and standing with them and talk about them a little bit. And then we do have a boat ride where we take them for about a 15-minute boat ride around our property here in our lagoon, where they get to see some more of the floral and fauna and get some really good pictures and stuff like that.
Jungle Adventures began in the 1970s as a private alligator farm, but has evolved into a tourist attraction focused on education and conservation. Florida animals are made accessible to the public.
Well, when they come here, as far as our Florida natives, we do have our alligators. Believe it or not, there are crocodiles native to Florida. We have an American crocodile here. We have coyotes, which aren't native, but they're here. We have native snakes, your rat snakes, things of that nature that we have in our shows. And who knows what's going to be out here in the swamp when you're walking around. What else do we have that's native? All the natural Florida stuff that you would find in the wild is going to be possibly blue herons, green herons, great white egrets, cattle egrets, ibis. A lot of birds like to come here and nest because this is a good location in the south, especially during migration times. Not native to Florida, but you do find them sometimes, is the macaques. You hear about them in Silver Springs and stuff. We do have a couple of macaque monkeys. We have a raccoon that we just acquired from our fish and wildlife officers, and Florida panthers, and the Florida black bear. Those are all native animals that you can encounter here in Jungle Adventures.
In addition to guiding visitors through jungle adventures, Reptile Ryan is one of the primary caretakers for the animals that live here.
We usually start pretty early in the morning, around 7:30ish, and the first thing we do is take a walk, make sure that all the enclosures are intact, that there wasn't a fallen limb or branch or anything that customers can trip on. And then we look at the health of each animal. We look at each animal we've been here with I've been here with some of them for over 20 years or since they were born. Other people have been here for a very long time, and they all like us. They have their normal things. Some people are a grouch in the morning. Our bear, he is not very social in the morning. Our panthers actually are more social in the morning. And if they start to act a little bit different, we can take notice and start to look and see if maybe there's something going on, a possible cold or something like that. And then there's the cleaning, of course. If something goes in, it comes out. So you got to clean up the cages, make sure that everybody's getting what they need, and knowing what to give each animal. Because, your omnivores have to have a little bit of mix of everything. But your vegetarians, like our fallow deer and our muntjac deer, they don't need much meat protein. They need more plant protein. So you have to make sure you know how to do the diets that way properly. The tortoises, there is a tortoise, the redfoot tortoises that we have, they do require some protein in their diet. Whereas the sulcata, or the large spur-thighed tortoises we have, they are only vegetables. So we have to make sure that they're not getting the wrong stuff in their diet, because it can cause health issues. So we have to keep an eye on that, make sure that everybody's doing good. That's kind of, that's the first thing in the morning. And then we move on to prepping the diets, getting the diets prepared, getting the animals fed and cleaned. And then coming back midday and double checking on them, make sure everything's okay, doing multiple walks throughout the day. And then you have your show staff, who does basically the same thing, but mostly with the animals that we do in the shows, or alligators or snakes or arachnids, stuff like that.
Unlike the carefully manicured landscapes at historic Florida attractions such as Bok Tower Gardens in Lake Wales, Murakami Museum and Japanese Gardens in Delray Beach, and Vizcaya Museum and Gardens in Miami, Jungle Adventures wants visitors to experience wild Florida nature.
Even the places who are Florida attractions, a lot of them now, what you see is a lot of it isn't even native plants and species. And people need to know what it was originally. The thing I like about Jungle Adventures, it's a true depiction of what's happening out in our wild. We don't do a lot of landscaping. We do trim bushes back and make sure things look presentable, but in Florida we have a problem with Brazilian peppers everywhere. Not native, and they kill native plants. We do have quite a few Brazilian peppers, where a lot of places I go, you don't see that. It's what attracted me to Jungle Adventures, because when I came here and visited, I said to myself, man, I feel like I'm out in the woods. And when I go out in the woods, I don't see what I see at other attractions. When I go here, I'm like, this is what I see in the woods. This is a true depiction of what's happening in our wild with the Brazilian peppers coming in and invading. We do trim them back and stuff, but we want people to see that this is the problem that can happen if we don't be good stewards and keep an eye on it, which we are being as good as we can, but still able to educate about why it's so important to keep our native species and stuff going. And without places like us and other small places, it's too fake. This is real. People need to know what real is.
As the population of Florida continues to grow, black bears are sometimes seen foraging in suburbs, alligators are found in neighborhood retention ponds, and flocks of blue heron stop traffic as they walk across roads. We can also encounter the wild Florida at natural attractions like Jungle Adventures. You've been watching Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. Visit us anytime on the web at myfloridahistory.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ben Brotemarkle. The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and by
The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is in the O'Galley section of Melbourne, Florida. Preserved as it was in the early 20th century, historic tours of the Rossiter House include antiques, artifacts, and family heirlooms, and the 1865 Houston Family Cemetery. The last resident of the home was successful businesswoman and philanthropist Caroline P. Rossiter. The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is available for weddings and other special events.
The Florida Historical Society Press publishes books on a variety of topics relating to our state's diverse history and culture. FHS Press titles include Life and Death at Windover, excavations of a 7,000-year-old pond cemetery, The Voyages of Ponce de Leon, scholarly perspectives, Hollow Victory, a novel of the Second Seminole War, Stetson Kennedy's Palmetto Country, and Walkin' Lawton. More information at fhspress.org. The Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Council of Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida.